With YouTube demonetizing independent media, please consider becoming a patron today for just $1 per month. Link below. Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Matt Jarbo, and Deadpool 2 hit theaters last weekend, and if you haven't seen it, you are missing out. Also, there is going to be spoilers in this article, but I have a feeling many of you out there who may not have seen the movie probably already know what they are, at least the main one that we're going to be talking about here, so I just want to give you a heads up on that one. I guess you could call it a trigger warning, but really, I'm just being courteous, you bastards. I'm being courteous, okay? Hold off on the trigger warning cut comments until we get to the end of the video at least. So Deadpool 2 writers apparently don't know what fridging is. And this is the big hot topic of the day. This is the big one. Ooh, fridging. Now, if you don't know what fridging is, well, we'll find out because this article will tell you. But you got to live here. Maybe that's a sexist thing because that's obviously what they're trying to do now. The movie came out. The movie's very successful. $300 million overseas or worldwide so far, and it's not showing many signs of really slowing down. Had a great Monday, 12 million US. That's pretty good. That just means that SJWs are going to find anything they can to nitpick in order to, well, you know, hey, turn a buck. And as a commenter on YouTube, I fully understand their reasoning for it, and I'm going to comment on their comments so we can all comment together. It's a really weird kind of sick, twisted system, isn't it? Oh well, let's continue. Now, the writers for Deadpool 2 admitted they don't know what fridging is. In the grand scheme of things, that's nowhere near as embarrassing as, say, not being able to name your local elected representative. However, it's pretty awkward when your literal job involves recognizing pop culture tropes, and particularly troubling for a box office giant that crossed 301 million worldwide over the weekend. Now, listen, I can't even tell you my local elected representative. Neither can many people out there. And neither one of those things is really embarrassing. We should maybe know it, but it's at the same point in time, I'm not going to shame someone over not knowing who their, who top of their head, who the councilman is, right? Like, oh, do you know who your elected representative is? No. Who you for shame? Strip naked as we walk through the streets with a bell behind you. It's ridiculous. That's such a lame attempt to open this particular article. But you can see what she's trying to do. She's trying to, again, like really just make this out to be far worse than it is. DC Comics writer Gail Simone coined the term women in refrigerators to describe the all too popular trope in superhero comics where a female character dies to motivate the male lead. It's generally seen as a cheap and sexist move, and it appeared in full force during Deadpool 2. Vanessa, Deadpool's girlfriend, dies violently in the first few minutes, and that's the impetus for Deadpool's emotional arc, a textbook's example of what fans refer to as a fridge girlfriend. Then when Cable joins the cast, we learn that he's also motivated by fridging. He's on the quest to avenge his wife and daughter who were murdered by a mutant supervillain. Basically, the whole film is about men using violence as a problem-solving tool after the women in their lives met violent ends. Now, I would argue that the Cable's wife and daughter were very violently murdered. Burned alive is clearly violent. I mean, and Vanessa, she got one shot to the chest from, and again, violent, but not as violent. The point here is that these are okay. The thing, it's hard. I get what she's trying to say. I'm gonna be fair. I get what she's trying to say. I don't agree with it in the term of like that it's a sexist term. The idea there was drawing parallels between Cable and Deadpool. They're setting up this bromance for the characters that are going to propel them through the next couple films. That's the whole point. They're propelling them together. They're making them best friends. In fact, that's a running gag when they meet up in the movie, when they finally team up in the film. Oh, we're best friends now, sort of thing. Like, oh, best friends who kill pedophiles together. Like, that's part of the gag. That's part of the joke. And what brought them there is meant to also unite them. And now also, I mean, if you follow the film, it may have been a setup, but it ultimately wasn't canon. And that should be what ultimately falls, what ultimately happens here. Because how many times have we seen, movies where people do respond to someone being killed? Would you call John Wick dog fridging? Because the dog died and then John Wick killed everybody. The movie, by the way, one of the best films of 2015. I recommend you don't see it. I recommend you do see it, I should say. Now, they said here we don't know what fridging was. In an interview with Vulture, screenwriters Rhett, Reese, and Paul Wernick gave us a clumsy response to the critique, saying, I would say no, we didn't even think about fridging, and that maybe was our mistake, not to think about it. But it didn't even really occur to us. We didn't know what fridging was. I know, those bastards. those bigoted, misogynistic, sexist bastards that wrote a script about two heroes in two different timelines coming together over the loss of their loved ones, both discovering that they want a family and then fighting for family. So yes, while the tragedy brought them together and the tragedies were similar, the idea there at the end, which is usually the entire point of the story, is not about, it's not necessarily about the journey, the destination. It's always the journey, but the journey is what kind of made them better characters as a result. And then, of course, again, given the fact that time travel is a thing in this, you can kind of understand where things are going, right? I mean, you can kind of see that at the end of the day, everyone is going to end up being just fine. So basically, the fridging never happened. Really, if you think about it, it never happened. It was a trope, sure, but at the end, they erased it. They refrigerated it. Damn it. Anyway, so he added that while earlier drafts involved a breakup instead of the tragic death of Vanessa, they decided that Deadpool kind of works best when he's had everything taken away from him. That's the definition of fridging. It characterizes women as things to be taken away from men in order to give them emotional motivation. Later in the interview, Wernick actually refers to Vanessa as a thing, saying the only thing Deadpool cares about and the only thing to really take away from him. Well, he's referring to her, yeah, in that regard, yeah, but it's an emotional thing. It's the entire first movie was him having his everything taken away from him, and her, including her, which he willfully did. And then they got back together, and then here it happened again. Not an unused trope when it comes to these types of films. Not necessarily the smartest thing ever written, but it just gets us from point A to point B. And you're not really going to go to Deadpool for real top-notch, discussions on representation and dismantling the patriarchy. I mean, my God, there's so many op-eds about Negasonic Teenage Warhead and her girlfriend Yukio and how like representation is done right with Deadpool 2 in that regard, simply because, oh, hey, they're in a relationship and it's never a big deal, as it is in like 99% of cases. Well, maybe not 99%, but a fair amount of cases in real life, right? Now, he made a joke about it, and Negasonic's like, calls him a bigot, and he's like, whoa, pump the brakes, Fox News, right? Like, plays it like that, like no one cares about this. It's not a big deal. Like you're jumping at you're kind of grasping at straws here because you want to be angry about something. And the same kind of outrage that Negasonic showed when he first questioned their relationship or just made a comment about it is the same kind of response we're seeing here. It's that instant jump at something without fully understanding the context, or at least asking what they mean, or giving them even the benefit of the doubt because they maybe didn't know what the term was. Not everyone knows everything, but the feminist tearing apart the writers of the film is just really funny to me because ultimately he's going to have probably zero impact on anything else they do going forward. Now he says maybe that's a sexist thing. I don't know, said Reese. I don't think that will be a large concern. It's not. None of the reviews I read about it were pulling up the fridge. None of them are saying it. They're saying, oh, Vanessa dies. That was what you heard that. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a trope. We've seen that before. Now the journey continues. Now, Wernick and Reese don't seem to understand how embarrassing this is for them. It's not embarrassing at all, actually. The whole point of Deadpool is to poke fun at superhero tropes that include some pretty deep cuts, like joking about Deadpool's co-creators Rob Liefeld's inability to draw feet, and yet somehow they haven't heard the phrase fridge girlfriend, a household in terms of comics fandom. Again, only in certain sections, and usually the people with blue hair, and have Tumblr blogs, and spend all day pedantically bitching on Twitter. That's where, or people who listen to Anita Sarkeesian, which really isn't as many as you might think. That's where you find it. That's where it's at. Most other people, most of the comic fans would be like, It's like the Bechdel test, right? It was created in the mid 1980s. It's now actually a rating system in Sweden, but again, it came out of like 1985 or 87 a comic strip that talked about it, and then it became this kind of like torch for certain feminists to use as a method, a metric of criticism, of how to attack something even further. And again, this article here is not even really about addressing the issue. It's, well, Wernick and Reese don't seem to understand how embarrassing this is. Is it? In the long run? Is it? If anything, this could be a joke for the next movie. And then that would really make you mad. So I really hope they do it. Now it says, even without the slang terminology, they don't recognize it's an overused trope. The concept of sexism didn't really even occur to them when killing off Vanessa. No, because they needed a catalyst to get through to the next part of the film. Having them break up wouldn't have done it. Having her kidnapped would have then put her like women in a box trope. You would have heard that. They were kind of backed into between a rope and a rock and a hard place in regards of how to sell this particular narrative, of how to push this story forward. So they chose to kill her off. Hey, guess what? And then they chose to bring her back. And they've already said that those scenes are canon. So no one died. Not even Cable's wife and daughter died. They were alive in the end because they saved the day. So if you want to argue that it's fridging, yeah, fridging just to get from point A to point B, but then it magically went away due to the power of time travel. Something that feels more realistic than this particular trope and how it's being currently used to attack this film. Now, it says this is a screenwriting equivalent of finding out a guy has never had a female friend. Reese and Wernick and director David Leitch and Ryan Reynolds, who had screenwriting credit, know so little about women in superhero comics that they don't even recognize the genre's most infamous sexist trope. Who knew that writers behind such beloved franchises would turn out to be fake geek boys? See, and again, that's such a lazy attack right there on them. Oh, they're fake geek boys because they don't know about this terminology that came out a long time ago from a writer. Yeah, okay. They read the comic. They maybe don't dive into the cultural conversation surrounding it. Clearly, they're there to tell jokes. Clearly, they're there to tell a story. Clearly, they're there to make fun of superhero tropes, and they did. But this movie wasn't so much about superhero tropes as much as it was really about making fun of itself. It was very meta in its approach, but that had more to do with meta on the Deadpool side of things, right? Like, that's that. But again, this is what happens when SJWs and these feminists, they come out and they want to criticize anything they can find about this movie in order to shame the people who made it, to make themselves feel morally righteous and superior. That's not going to work here. People love the movie. The movie is really good. And at the end, and I love how you failed to mention this, because spoilers ahead, but let me not clarify the actual end of the movie, where they lived. But Ryan Reynolds died at the end. And, you didn't mention that he went back to kill himself. Right? That should be a trope of some kind. I don't know. The point is, this is stupid. It's so ridiculously, utterly stupid. But once again, this is just the world we find ourselves in. But what do you guys think about this? Do you think they have a point? Do you think that this was just lazy writing, or was it just playing into a trope because it just felt like the right thing to do? Or do they just get it wrong, or they get everything else wrong? These are things I'm curious to know. Let me know in the comments below. My name is, of course, Matt Jarbo. If you haven't already, please thumbs up the video, subscribe to the channel. Help support the channel via Patreon right now. Best way to do that. If not, you want to watch more content, and I hope you do, you can do so right now.